If you've seen my Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe video, you'd know that that race is one of the biggest races that Japan wants to win outside their own country. They've been trying for decades but still haven't managed it, but surprisingly there are other races held outside Japan apparently. I know, it's pretty crazy. Japan has a long history of sending racehorses out into the world on excursions to try and win big on foreign soil. Apart from one outlier event in Russia, we can go back to 1954 when those tea-spilling Americans invited Japan to a race sold, it doesn't exist anymore, the Washington DC International. Japan tried to send Hakurio, who was fresh off a win at the Kika show and had never nor would ever place below third in a race, but couldn't make it due to travel issues. The following year though, the JRA said, hey, imagine if that went well, and started scheming a plot for mass excursions. Hakochikara would be the first expedition horse sent out post-Russo-Japanese War to American soil, and while he didn't exactly rack up wins left and right, he did end up winning the 1959 Washington Birthday Handicap Stakes. Japanese horses would sporadically race in America for the next few years, but expeditions really started to get crazy when they decided to really aim for the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. In the late 60s, they decided to send a horse who conveniently lines up with this from an umamusume perspective to America in Speed Symboli. The hitherto 8-race winning Speed Symboli ended up coming in 5th place out of 9 races in the 1967 Washington DC International. Speed Symboli would go on a European excursion 2 years later where he would place 5th in the succinctly named King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Stakes, and then would go on to place 10th in the Grand Prix de Deauville and 11th in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. He was the only Japanese participant in the Arc, and though the placements he got weren't exactly high, the JRA looked at this as vindication that they could at the very least compete on foreign soil, and with enough training, know-how, and good old-fashioned power of friendship, eventually win the Arc and then make a mobile game where the whole thing is centered around whoever won it. They were surprisingly in-depth planners. It would take a while to get things moving again, since Japan experienced nothing but debilitating losses in their excursion attempts for the next 20 years or so. To see how well they would compete on a global scale, they created the Japan Cup in 1981, which would be an international race in an otherwise isolated racing scene. Horses from all over the world were invited to compete with Japan's best local horses, and for Japan this would be a real test to see how they could compete overseas, and then foreign horses won the first 3 Japan Cups. These two factors weren't exactly a good look for Japan's excursion aspirations, but they did finally get a domestic winner in the 1984 Japan Cup in Katsuragi Ace. Of course, Katsuragi Ace couldn't exactly go anywhere since he was set to retire the following month's Arima Keenan, but there were a few promising options for expeditions that were sent out, and this is where our story really starts. Since this is an umamusume channel, I'll be covering this primarily from an umamusume perspective, so sorry to all the Gallop Dyna fans of the world, but we're starting with 2 horses from the same farm as Speed Symboli, Symboli Rudolph and Sirius Symboli. Sirius Symboli was chosen to head overseas after winning an incredibly muddy 1985 Japan Derby along with 2 first place and 1 second place finish out of 4 open races. Sirius ventured to Europe quickly after his Derby win and got off to a decent start, placing 8th in the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Stakes, 4th in the Grosser Prix van Baden, 6th in the Prix du Prince d'Orange, and 3rd in the Prix Royal Oak. Now these placings may not exactly jump off the page, but you've got to take into account that 3 of those 4 races were G1 races on a completely different track type than he was used to. Just to reiterate from my ARC video, there are several factors that make horse racing in foreign countries difficult. In most cases, horses train on the same style of track of the country they're born in, so the soil and track type are different for starters. On top of other factors, such as rules and regulations and jockey styles, adaptation to foreign soil is often the biggest challenge, not called spending millions of dollars to send a horse halfway across the globe. Although to defend France's dirt, which isn't something I'd expect I'd do, Sirius's first 2 races were also on turf in the same distance as the Japan Derby, albeit not as muddy. Sirius Symboli did start to get a little more successful the longer he stayed in Europe. But seeing as how Sirius probably needs a break, let's catch up with his farm mate Symboli Rudolph. By 1986, Symboli Rudolph was already a 7-time G1 winner and Triple Crown racehorse. A feud broke out between his owner and trainer over whether or not to send him to America or Europe. Eventually, it was decided to go with the owner's plan to go to America, so the trainer's plan of not helping if that was the case was also implemented. Rudolph would race in the 1986 San Luis Race Stakes in sunny Santa Anita, California, placing 6th behind winner Dahar. Unfortunately, this would turn out to not only be Rudolph's only race in America, but his last race in general. Before the race, his jockey noticed that something was off and advised pulling out of the race, but was summarily ignored. During the race, Rudolph developed ligamentitis in his left front leg, and after returning to Japan, although there were thoughts of another excursion, he had to retire. Why don't we go check back up on our good friend Sirius Symboli? He spent the entire year in France and Italy in 1986 to prepare for the first attempt at the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe since Mijiro Musashi's previous attempt in 1972. Now with French jockeys, Sirius's podium finishes included a 3rd place finish at the Prix Seasick and a 2nd place finish at the Prix Foy. Thanks not only to those finishes, but also never placing below 5th in European races that year and his Japan Derby win last year, Symboli Symboli was the sole Japanese representative at the 1986 arc. Putting his 1.5 years of experience to good use, Sirius competed but placed 14th, far behind winner Dancing Brave, with reasons stemming from his high workload over the year, which seemed to have an effect on his health and made him irritable. Although he did pick up a few more high finishes, notably in the Prix du Conseil de Paris and Prix Mont Blanc in the same year, his 1987 finishes weren't so great, and Sirius returned to Japan to race with a Guri cap, among others. So you may say to yourself, wow, Sirius did pretty bad, but his excursions were one thing if not anything else. Proof that Japan needed to learn from this. Sirius encountered numerous logistical issues during his time in Europe that would teach Japan about how to further approach excursions down the line. So if you really think about it, Sirius Symboli was a martyr for future excursion horses. And as a special reward, when he returned to Japan, he got so angry that he kicked 2 horses in the Mainichi Okan and almost didn't get in trouble for it. It would take us a little while to get our next couple of umamusume counterparts, but in the interim, Hong Kong would start up a few international races of their own. The Hong Kong Cup was established in 1988 under the name Hong Kong Invitational Cup as another race which was open to participants from other countries. The Hong Kong Vase and Hong Kong Mile were also established shortly after and featured visits from the likes of Tonino Create from the same farm as Tonino Gimlet, for example. Yeah, I can shoehorn in whatever I want, it's my video. Eventually, these 3 races, joined by the Hong Kong Sprint, would become some of the biggest races in Hong Kong, taking place every December. But still, no Japanese horses could claim victory in foreign countries as of yet. After sending horses out on excursions steadily since Sirius Symboli's time in Europe, and presumably now that there were a whole 5 winners out of the 16 races of the Japan Cup, Japan was finally ready to send 2 more future umamusume out on excursions in 1997 by sending 1 horse to France and another to Hong Kong. Let's go chronologically, there's no better way. Sakura Laurel was the next horse with eyes on the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe in 1997. Laurel at this point had won the 1996 JRA Best Horse Award after winning the Spring Tonneau Show and Arima Keenan and taking 3rd in the Autumn Tonneau Show, among other accolades. Laurel's owners desperately wanted to be the ones to finally crack the ARC code, and so another expedition to France was made and resulted in Laurel not only placing 8th in the Prix Foy, but also tearing a flexor tendon during said race. It was such a serious injury that his retirement was announced before even returning to Japan. So France didn't work out, but how about Hong Kong? By December 1997, Laurel and Suzuka had experienced mixed success with wins in the principal stakes and debut races, but floundered in G1 such as the Japan Derby, Autumn Tonneau Show, and Mile Championship. Suzuka was entered into the Hong Kong Cup with a new jockey since his previous one had a prior racing commitment. Suzuka entered alongside fierce competition and ended up taking 5th place after changing styles and racing further ahead than usual. This would, however, be a revelation for Suzuka's camp, as his new jockey for this race, Yutaka Take, found that if Suzuka ran as what we would call a front-runner, then he'd be a real threat. And this was proven in the following year in 1998 when Suzuka went undefeated, taking wins in 6 graded races, including the Takarazuka Kinen and Mainichi Okan. 1998 also featured 2 more excursions we can talk about. Taiki Shuttle and Seeking the Pearl were both shipped off to France this time, but not with eyes on the Arc since they had competed in shorter distance races over both of their careers. Seeking the Pearl, coming off 6 graded victories including the NHK Mile Cup, had plans to race in the Prix de Jacques Lemeroy. Taiki Shuttle, who had placed first in 9 races including the Mile Championship and Sprinter Stakes, also entered that race. So since Pearl's camp wasn't confident against him, they switched to the Prix Maurice de Geest a few days earlier. Seeking the Pearl initially led her race thanks to a slower pace with relative ease. She did have to blow off some challengers and was competing all the way to the finish line, but she was finally able to pull off a triumphant victory by shattering a record that stood for 17 years, at the same time providing Japan with its first ever international victory in Europe. And what's even better, they wouldn't have to wait long for their second, as Taiki Shuttle also won his race the week after once he took the lead in the final 100 meters of his race. Since she was the first to do it, Seeking the Pearl was all over the news and regaled as a hero. While Taiki Shuttle had intended to race further in Europe and eventually in the Breeders' Cup in America, he instead returned to Japan and picked up another victory in his 2nd straight Mile Championship. Seeking the Pearl unfortunately would go on to place 5th in her 2nd race in France, the Prix de Moulins de Longchamp, but in 1999 headed to America in the beginning of the year to race in the Santa Monica Handicap. In this race, Pearl was erratic with positions, starting off toward the front in 3rd and 4th, then falling behind once the pace hastened, but made up some ground at the end, managing a 4th place finish. So, we finally have winners in France, but neither Seeking the Pearl nor Taiki Shuttle were suited for long distances and didn't feasibly have any chance in the Arc. You'll never believe what ideas Japan got in their head next. After resting for the winter, El Condor Pasa was next in line to challenge for the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. El had an impressive streak of 6 wins in 7 races with victories in G1s like the NHK Mile Cup and Japan Cup. Oh hey, the Japan Cup was won by a Japanese horse again. That's a good sign. This time Japan really wanted to get the specialization down, so they had El Condor Pasa stay at the same stable that Taiki Shuttle stayed at. The plan was to train for unfamiliar terrain and participate in 2 spring races and 2 fall races. Though he struggled at first, El eventually got comfortable with the turf and was ready to go ham. El Condor Pasa ended up placing second in his first race, the Prix d'Espagne. Although that's a much better placement than was anticipated, there were serious concerns over his stamina since he did have the lead for the majority of the race but lost it at the very end. But his staff was determined, saying it would be a waste to return to Japan after 1 race. El's next race was the Grand Prix de St. Cloud and featured nasty competition including French and Irish Derby winner Dreamwell and previous ARC winner Sagamix. Entering his second favorite, El Condor Pasa would find himself in 4th or 3rd throughout, but go on to win this race by 2.5 lengths after easily slipping past his adversaries. After that, even though there was a small injury scare, El would also go on to win the Prix Foy as the favorite, although it was a race featuring only 3 horses. And finally, it was time for the ARC. There was bad weather the day before the ARC, which left the track in a bad state, but El Condor Pasa showed off his experience and managed to hold and keep the lead in the last straight. He held the lead but was doggedly pursued by Mancha, who eventually overtook the number 1 spot in the last 100 meters, winning over El Condor Pasa by half a length. Despite this, El returned to Japan a hero and was awarded a very special banner upon arrival to the airport. Ah, how sweet. Before we move on, we can get back to checking in on Seeking the Pearl, who was returned to America. Forgoing original plans to rest for the winter, Pearl now found herself in the Noble Damsel Stakes in New York. She entered this race as the number 1 favorite, but couldn't compete in the end, coming in 4th place in the final straight. She then went a bit south to compete in the Laurel Dash Stakes, but fell all the way down to 7th. Seeking the Pearl would retire shortly afterward, but retire with 8 victories in 21 races. In 2000, after placing 2nd in the Japan Derby and a close finish after winning the Satsuki Show, Air Shakur made the trip over to Britain to participate in the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Stakes just to quote, feel something. I should stop making things up that horses said. The winner of this race, however, was Mancha, fresh off losing in the Japan Cup to Special Week after Air Shakur stayed behind most of the race and didn't up the pace enough in the final straight, landing in 5th. You may remember that particular Japan Cup from season 1 of the umamusume anime, but there's actually another participant in that race we can cover next, Stay Gold. Stay Gold up until 2001 raced for 5 years and 43 races and won 4 of them, and 3 of them were in his 2nd year in ungraded races. That being said, he did have quite a few podium finishes with 24. Not exactly a dominant force, but still a horse to watch out for who competed with the likes of Special Week, TM Opera O, Grass Wonder, and Saiyan Sky. Before winning the 2001 Nikkei Shinshinhai, Stay Gold's camp had designs on sending him to America, but decided against it. They did, however, decide to go to Dubai to participate in the Dubai Shima Classic in March. His biggest competition was Fantastic Light, an American horse who had claimed victories over Sagamix and Mancha and competed with TM Opera O and Meisho Dodo, who, despite what his anthropomorphized counterpart's in-game personality may make you think, was a fierce competitor. Stay Gold got off to a good start and stayed in the middle group before making his move in the last spurt, ending up in a photo finish with Fantastic Light. After deliberation, it was revealed that the winner, by a nose, was Stay Gold, making him the first Japanese horse to win a race in Dubai. Stay Gold would temporarily return to Japan to do more things like losing more races and beating TM Opera O and then getting disqualified, as one does, but you can only take so much TM Opera O before you have to go to Hong Kong. Stay Gold was actually one of 3 horses to participate in the Hong Kong International races, as he won alongside Asian Preston, who would compete in the Hong Kong Mile, and Agnes Digital, who would compete in the Hong Kong Cup. What a police lineup. Stay Gold would participate in the Hong Kong base in order to avoid becoming enthralled in a fan manga, and even though he started to run diagonally because he saw the color blue, which is a real thing that happens to him, he ended up winning the Hong Kong race and became the first and one of a scant few all-time Japanese racehorses to win 2 international races in 2 different countries. Because I need to procrastinate talking about Agnes Digital as much as possible because she scares me, I'd also like to point out that Stay Gold was sired by a pretty famous racehorse, Sunday Silence. Sunday Silence was an American Double Crown racehorse who won 9 of his 14 races and otherwise placed 2nd in the rest. After his career, Sunday Silence retired to Japan to stud in 1990. It was in Japan that Sunday Silence became the top sire for over a decade straight, producing future stars like Silent Suzuka, Special Week, Agnes Tachyon, Still in Love, Zeno Robroy, and Manhattan Cafe, to name a few. Outside of anime girlified horses, he also sired Deep Impact and Dance Partner. Because Sunday Silence was a foreign horse, the hope was that he would pass down genetic traits that would better help Japan's capabilities of not only competing domestically, but internationally as well. Stay Gold was in a similar boat after proving that he could compete overseas. He would retire to stud after winning the Hong Kong vase, and if you've ever heard of Stay Gold, you've probably heard of the fan-coined Stay Gold family, several members of which would have a big presence overseas that we'll cover later. But alright, let's talk about Crazy Horse. Agnes Digital, much like Meisho Dodo, may give you a false impression based on how the character is portrayed in umamusume, but it can't be stressed enough how good Agnes Digital was. For reference, right before the Hong Kong Cup, Digital had won 3 graded races in a row, including 2 G1s, and in his most recent race defeated TM Opera O, Stay Gold, and Meisho Dodo in the Autumn to No Show. After Stay Gold and Asian Preston had won their races, Agnes Digital was the last one remaining from that trip. Digital entered the Hong Kong Cup as second favorite and would engage in several challenges with European horse Tobug. They spent the entire race trading the lead between them before Agnes Digital ended up taking the only lead that mattered at the end and won the race, meaning Japan had won 3 of the 4 2001 Hong Kong International races. We actually get to stick with Agnes Digital, as after taking a quick return to Japan to win the February stakes, Digital once again was sent on excursion, this time to Dubai for the Dubai World Cup. Well, eventually anyway. Digital actually got stuck in a Hong Kong airport due to aircraft trouble, and if that wasn't bad enough, there was once again bad weather that wrecked the track. That may or may not be because of this, but Digital ended up coming in 6th in a pack far behind winner Street Cry. Not to be stopped by one bad race though, Digital then returned to Hong Kong to compete against Asian Preston in the Queen Elizabeth II Cup. Although Agnes Digital led for most of the last straight, Asian Preston would pull ahead and snatch victory away. I know, I expect him to be an umamusume too. Digital would then return to Japan to set a record in the Yasuda Kinen before retiring in 2003. But we don't have time for 2003, we need to go back to France. Back at it again for the 2002 Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, because why not? The competitor from Japan this year was to be Manhattan Cafe, who was boasting 3 consecutive wins in G1 races at the time. Cafe spent the entire summer getting used to the European track and actually entered the arc as the 5th favorite to win. Although Manhattan Cafe started strong, unfortunately developed an injury in his leg during the race and ended up falling all the way down to 13th place. As a result of this injury, this ended up being Cafe's last race, only a 1.5 year long career. Later in the year, prolific sprinter Believe was sent abroad for the 2nd ever running of the Hong Kong Sprint. Since debuting in 2000, Believe had raced 20 times but has struggled, placing decently in pre-op races but not so much in graded ones. 2002 was the start of big things for Believe though, as she had won both the Centaur Stakes and Sprinter Stakes. However, while traveling to Hong Kong, she lost almost 50 pounds, and this change in her condition threw her off as she placed 12th after being left behind by the pack. We can actually skip much of the anticipated 2003 because Japan decided to try to win the arc again in 2004 with Tap Dance City. Even though he'd been racing since 2000 with good results, he was coming off a career year with 4 wins and 6 races in 03, one of which being a 9-length victory in the Japan Cup and 2 more wins in 04. It was after his Japan Cup victory that Tap Dance City staff declared their intent to run in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, so Tap Dance City was shipped off to Europe to train after some transportation fumbles in September. Despite only being there for a short amount of time, it was said that Tap Dance City was adapting well to Europe. He was in good condition all the way up to the actual day of the race when strangely he was more tense after being transported to the race course. He started off strong toward the front of the racers, but that didn't last very long and he ended up falling all the way down to 17th place just after the 300-meter remaining mark, losing to relative underdog Bago. Tap Dance City returned to Japan and had intended to retire in the Arima Kinen but placed 2nd behind Zeno Robroy, so his retirement was postponed for another year, which included a victory at his 3rd straight Kinko show. Later in that same year, Japan would once again try their luck in Hong Kong, sending 2 calm and well-demeanored horses to participate in the Hong Kong Sprint and Hong Kong Mile, Calstone Lido and Durandal. Oh boy. Calstone Lido, over his career, had what could be politely referred to as fluctuating results, but was selected to participate in the Hong Kong Sprint after a particularly strong 2004. He actually entered as 2nd favorite and was competing for the lead, but fell off dramatically in the second half and ended up placing 14th. Durandal, on the other hand, was actually the favorite to win the Hong Kong Mile and had a much better track record than Calstone Lido, with 8 wins including 3 G1 victories. However, despite the fact that the condition of the track at the time was reported to be good and firm, that turned out not to be the case as per Durandal's jockey. He lost his balance due to the watering of the track and ended up placing 5th. Following this, Durandal developed laminitis, which is a terrible disease for horses that causes terrible pain in their hooves. Retirement was on the horizon for Durandal, but he did return in 2005 after a 10-month break to take 2nd in the Sprinter Stakes. Now that it's a new year, it's time to break new ground. Yeah, you thought. Zeno Robroy's been going crazy in Japan, with podium finishes in 14 of 16 races, including wins in the 2004 Fall G1s, the Autumn to No Show, Japan Cup, and a record-setting win at the Arima Kinen, which still stands to this day. Zeno Robroy had eyes on the same races again in his final year of racing, and following a 3rd place finish in the Takarazuka Kinen, eyes were turned to Europe for international competition. The King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Stakes were considered, but ultimately, the International Stakes was selected as the race to run in. There was heavy competition from all over Europe to make up for a big race between 7 7 horses. Zeno Rob Roy took the lead after some blocking by other horses, but would engage in a battle with Electrocutionist and Marahel at the tail end of the race that saw him overtaken, losing by a neck to Electrocutionist and ahead of Marahel. Ahead. Following this loss, there was consideration to participate in the Irish Championship Stakes, but the Autumn G1s were the priority, and Zeno Rob Roy ended his career in Japan the same year, amassing at the time the second most earnings by any Japanese racehorse in history behind TM Opera O. But the year is still young, and there's still time to break new ground. Not here. Here. And actually the year isn't so young anymore now that I look at it. Nearly 50 years after Hakuchikara became the lone Japanese racehorse to win a race in America, it was now time for Cesario to get a shot in the American Oaks. Special Week Special Girl had debuted just a year before traveling to America, picking up wins in 4 of 5 races including a victory at the Japanese Oaks. Which must be why they picked the American Oaks. Because they're both oaks. So anyway, Cesario's trainer was inspired by the exploits of horses like Air Shakor and Agnes World, so he decided to take on an expedition of his own. Cesario was reportedly a little nervous from all the eyes on her the day of the race, but aside from that was in regular form. If she was nervous, you wouldn't know it by watching the race, since Cesario raced strongly throughout and managed to beat out favorite Malor Ainda by a record 4 lengths and in a record time that stood for almost 20 years. Cesario would also become the first American G1 winner as a Japan bred horse, a Japanese classic race winning horse, and as a 3-year-old horse. Cesario naturally returned to Japan a hero, winning the JRA Best 3-Year-Old Filly and Best Domestic Horse Awards, and had eyes on running in the first ever running of the Victoria Mile, as well as in a series of races in a collection known as the Asian Mile Challenge, but while training, Cesario would develop suspensory desmitis and would subsequently retire, with the American Oaks being her final race. We're skipping ahead a few years now to talk about Casino Drive. Casino Drive isn't playable, but is actually an American-bred Japan-trained horse, and since he's also an umamusume, we can talk about him. In his early years, Casino Drive threw off his trainer, got injured, had to stall his debut, and won his debut by a huge margin, the normal procedure. Due to his pedigree of being sired by 2003 American Horse of the Year Mineshaft, who had also sired 2006 Belmont Stakes winner Jazzle and 2007 Belmont winner Rags to Riches, Casino Drive would spend the majority of the year in America, starting off at the 2008 Peter Pan Stakes. Casino Drive showed off his true strength here, as in his second race he took off, took the lead, and won by almost 6 lengths, becoming the first Japanese trained horse to win an American dirt race. Casino Drive impressed a lot of people with this race and was going to enter the Belmont Stakes against that year's hopeful undefeated Triple Crown horse Big Brown, but the day before the race Casino Drive got a bruise on his leg and had to withdraw. Fortunately, he'd be back to racing in America later that year. Since Casino Drive needs a break, let's talk about arguably the strongest mare in Japanese history, Vodka. Vodka was on a dominant run after setting a record in the 2006 Hanshin Juvenile Fillies, winning the following year's Tulip Show and becoming the 3rd filly ever to win the Japan Derby. In 2007, Vodka made a trip over to Europe to prepare for, you guessed it, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, but had to withdraw due to injury. Vodka's staff wouldn't let the idea of an expedition go away just like that though, so in early 2008, in the midst of a bit of a slump, Vodka was sent to Dubai to race in the Dubai Duty Free. Vodka raced toward the front, placing around 4th in the beginning of the race and showed a little promise going around the final corner as she made a move to the outside, but ended up staying in 4th place to finish. This is a pretty impressive result notwithstanding, so she took back to Japan to try and break out of this drought she was in. After a few months of rest, Casino Drive is back and ready to make the Americans look bad again. This time he intended to enter the Breeders' Cup Classic, so he entered the Allowance Stakes to qualify. Showing no signs of wear from his previous injury, Casino Drive took an outside approach toward the lead and on the second turn took it full stop. His pursuers almost caught him, but Casino Drive took first place and 2 weeks later entered the Breeders' Cup. In this race he launched out of the gate powerfully, taking the lead and keeping it for a good while, but this pace tired him out significantly. He fell further and further back behind more and more horses and ended up coming in last place, a full 21 lengths behind the winner. Casino Drive returned to Japan to some success, including a win at the 2009 Alexandrite Stakes. Upon returning to Japan after her trip to Dubai, Vodka broke out of her slump, getting podium finishes in all 5 of her races, which included wins in the Yasuda Keenan and a record-setting win in the Autumn Tano Show. Thus, a return to Dubai was planned. Vodka would participate in the Jebel Hada and Dubai Duty Free again in 2009. This time, she would stay there for a bit longer than before, but placed 5th in the Jebel Hada, where she pretty much was for the entire race and falling from 2nd to 7th in the Dubai Duty Free after losing all her stamina and getting caught by the pack she raced ahead of. The day before the Dubai Duty Free, Casino Drive made his return to the world of overseas racing in the Dubai World Cup. He started off toward the front of the middle, around 5th place, but at the 600-meter mark started falling further and further back and found himself far behind the eventual winner, Well Armed, who, to be fair, left everyone in the dust. It was said that his inexperience among the competitors is what really did him in, as he finished in 8th, a crazy 27 lengths behind the winner. After this race, it was found that Casino Drive required surgery on his front left leg and wouldn't race for the next 2 years. He returned and had a few more races in 2011 to mixed success, but that would be his final year on a racetrack. Vodka's most recent return to Japan saw her again claim podium finishes in all 5 races she competed in, this time including 3 more G1 wins, so you'll never believe where she went in 2010. This time, however, she will be joined by fellow umamusume counterpart Red Desire. In her debut year of 2009, Red Desire got podium finishes in every race she competed in, including a win at that year's Shuka Show and second place finishes behind Buena Vista at the Oka Show and Japanese Oaks. She had also placed 3rd behind winner Vodka at the Japan Cup that year. As Buena Vista would be sent to Dubai later in the month, arguably the 3 strongest fillies at the time were sent out to the UAE capital in March. First, Red Desire and Vodka went into the Al Maktoum Challenge. This race was announced as Vodka's retirement race since she was starting to develop chronic nosebleeds. In this race, Vodka had a pretty rough showing all around, placing in 8th, while Red Desire on the other hand took off from the outside and won the whole thing. Buena Vista also had a strong showing on foreign soil. Coming off a Double Crown year in 2009, she entered the Dubai Shima Classic a few weeks after the Al Maktoum Challenge. She started off toward the back, but made up staggering ground, catching up to the leader Dar Remy, but would get blocked and place a respectable 2nd. Buena Vista then returned home because she had more G1s to win. Unlike the other 2, Red Desire still had an expedition itch to scratch. She remained in Dubai and partook in the Dubai World Cup 3 weeks after her victory in the Al Maktoum Challenge. Red Desire would be unable to repeat her success in her previous race though, falling all the way down to 11th place after racing toward the middle and the back for the duration of the race. She returned home to place 4th in the Victoria Mile behind Buena Vista, and would then go on to travel later in the year, this time to America. At this point though, Red Desire, much like Vodka, has started developing a chronic nosebleed. This will be a problem in Japan where she wouldn't be allowed to race, but that's not a restriction in America, so that's convenient. Red Desire entered the Flower Bowl Stakes, but because of the terrible conditions, really could never make a good final push, but still ended up placing 3rd. The following month, Red Desire found herself in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, but didn't break out enough in the final stretch and wound up taking 4th. While Red Desire returned to Japan and would retire shortly after this, Japan had sent another racer to America, Espoir City. Espoir City by this point was a prolific dirt racer, taking wins in the February Stakes, Championship Cup, and won the Kashiwakinen twice. Espoir City would be sent to America to participate in the 2010 Breeders' Cup after flirting with the idea of a trip to Dubai. Although Espoir City did take the lead after the 4th corner, he couldn't keep up with the pace and ended up falling back to 10th place. Upon his return, thanks to his previous exploits though, he won his 2nd JRA award for Best Dirt Racehorse. And you might think we're done with 2010, but we aren't. We actually need to go back in time just a little bit and back over the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, you thought I forgot about the Ark, but I was just distracted by Espoir City. This time, Nakayama Festa was to be Japan's latest attempt in the biggest race in France. Following a victory at the Takarazuka Kinen, the first overseas competitor of the Stay Gold progeny was sent to France and competed in the Prix Foy to prepare for the Ark, where he had a lead, but fell to 3rd afterwards and ended up clawing his way back into 2nd. Still, this was a good sign, so there was some optimism when the Ark came around. Nakayama Festa wasn't the only one sent to France this time around, as he would be joined by Victoire Pisa, who had accumulated 7 podium finishes since debuting, including 5 first-place finishes that saw him win the Satsuki Show and Yayoi Show. Victoire Pisa also had eyes on the Ark, and on the same day Nakayama Festa entered the Prix Foy, Victoire Pisa was entered into the Prix Neil. He competed in the middle group, but couldn't keep his pace in the final straight, ending up in 4th. Thus, both horses entered the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. Victoire Pisa struggled mightily in this race and could never break out from the back of the pack, but Nakayama Festa found himself in a fight on the last stretch with British horse Workforce. Unfortunately, he couldn't take the lead and ended up coming in 2nd, a place not taken in the Arc since El Condor Pasa over a decade before. Victoire Pisa had finished in 8th but rose to 7th due to a disqualification on another runner. Despite this, both horses entered the next year with chips on their shoulders in different ways. Since it's 2011 now, let's go see what's happening in Dubai. Buena Vista once again made the trip out to participate in the Dubai World Cup, this time alongside Transcend. Since last time, Buena Vista had picked up victories in the Victoria Mile and Autumn Tano Show, as well as 2nd place finishes in the Takarazuka Kinen, Japan Cup, and Arima Kinen. Transcend, on the other hand, was dominating the dirt scene, having won 3 straight races including 2 G1s before making the trip over. The pair were also joined by Victoire Pisa, who was eager to re-establish himself after what happened in Europe. There was a slow pace in the Dubai World Cup that didn't favor a back-end racer like Buena Vista, who would end up in 8th place, but it does offer a good advantage to runners who took the lead early, like Transcend and Victoire Pisa. These two would actually compete with each other over first place, with Victoire Pisa overtaking Transcend at the end to win. The 3 returned to Japan to find a whole mess of different success stories. Dubai would also see the excursion debut of Rulership that year, who entered the Dubai Shima Classic. Rulership was looking for his first G1 victory after coming up short in both the Japan Derby and Arima Kinen, and although he had won other races, there was a clear and really funny pattern forming. Rulership got off to a great start, solidifying himself in 3rd place. As he entered the final straight though, he would fall further and further behind and wound up placing 6th. And you'll never believe the result of his next race. This time with feeling, Nakayama Festa returned to France. Once again, he would enter the Prix Foy, and although he had the lead for a time, he couldn't maintain it and fell back to 4th place where he finished. Despite this, he still participated in the arc and once again had a really strong start, finding himself comfortably in second early, but once again couldn't maintain it and ended up falling all the way down to 11th, ironically right above last year's winner Workforce, which I'll say again, can't wait for that to be an anime scene somewhere down the line. We have one more expedition from 2011 from a racer you might not expect. Current-chan was on the roll of her life, winning 4 straight graded races, including the Sprinter Stakes, so she was invited to the Hong Kong Sprint, which played right into where she was most comfortable. Current paced herself at around the 4th place spot, but couldn't get out beyond that point, so she ended up placing 5th after falling behind a smidge at the end. In 2012, hot off the heels of Victoire Pisa's victory last year, Japan sent Asian Flash, Transcend, and Smart Falcon to run in the Dubai World Cup. Since we last saw him, Transcend continued his hot streak with 3 more podium finishes and 2 wins, whereas Asian Flash hasn't gotten a victory in almost 2 years. Smart Falcon, however, was well on his way to stardom, as by this point he had 3 record finishes, 19 graded race wins, and an undefeated 2011, which of course made Smart Falcon the second favorite to win. Hey, wait a minute. The Dubai World Cup that year, however, would come to be a horror show for Japan. Transcend showed promise at the start by carrying a lead, but couldn't maintain it past the 3rd corner and fell all the way down to 13th. Asian Flash showed decent strength, but couldn't muster out a meaningful final sprint and placed 6th. Smart Falcon, though, would have it the worst. At the start of the race, he hit the gate as he jumped out too early, hurting his leg in the process and could never get going, placing 10th. While Transcend would carry on racing but retire this year, and Asian Flash would continue for a few more years after winning the Autumn Tonneau Show, Smart Falcon, though he had recovered from the incident at the World Cup and intended to race again, developed tendonitis in his old age and retired after this race. By April, Rulership has broken his pattern of winning and then losing, but not in a good way, and thus set his eyes on Hong Kong's Queen Elizabeth II Cup. Still yet to win a G1, Rulership got off to a similar pace that he did in the Dubai Shima Classic, placing comfortably in 3rd. This time, competing against European G1 giants, Rulership took off in the final straight, leaving his opposition almost 4 lengths behind him to take the victory and finally a G1 win. Rulership returned to Japan and competed in G1 races exclusively for the rest of the year, not collecting victories, but podium finishes nonetheless. You know, I was just thinking it's probably about time that Japan took on the arc again. Who are they going to send now? Oh, they mean business this time. Orfevre at this point was probably the strongest horse that Japan had ever sent abroad. He was coming off his 3-year-old year in which he won the Triple Crown and the Arima Keenan and was sent to France with 5 G1 victories under his belt. Orfevre partook in his trial race for the arc, the Prix Foy, against a small pool of 4 other racers and won by a length after a brief duel with Meandri. Orfevre actually entered the arc as the shared #1 favorite after his performance in the Prix Foy. This time, though, Orfevre would have to contend with 17 other racehorses from across the country. Orfevre ran at the back for the majority of the race, staying there until the final straight itself. At this point, Orfevre would take off. Far outside, Orfevre climbed past everyone, taking the lead in the last 300 meters. It was then that Orfevre made a strange directional mishap, veering towards the inner rail, and would lose to Salemia by a neck. Orfevre would return to Japan to plot his revenge. Let's check back in on Current-chan. After winning her second G1 at the Takamatsu no Miya Keenan, the curtain was starting to close on her career in 2012, so it was decided that her final race would be at the Hong Kong Sprint, the same race that she placed 5th in the year before. Current-chan would also be sent with who she finished second to in that year's Sprinter Stakes, Lord Kanaloa. At the sprint, Current got off to a late start and was blocked practically the whole time, so ended up in 7th place to cap off her racing time. For what it's worth though, Lord Kanaloa did win this race, so it was another international victory for Japan. It's 2013 now, and there's a new scary horse on the field. 2012's Triple Tiara winner Gentildonna was on a tear that even saw her defeat Orfevre at the Japan Cup. Gentildonna had plans to participate in the arc alongside Orfevre in 2012, but decided to focus on the Tiara instead, so this year, for real, it's time to go on an expedition. The plan was to go to the Dubai Shima Classic, return for the Takarazuka Keenan, and then go to the arc. In March, Gentildonna went to Dubai as the #1 favorite for the Shima Classic. She performed admirably throughout the race, but raced alongside the outside for most of it, which likely sapped most of her strength. She ended up placing a little over 2 lengths behind St. Nicholas Abbey. Per the plan, she returned to Japan for the Takarazuka Keenan, but placed 3rd there behind winner Goldship. Because of that loss, the plan to run the arc was cancelled. Fortunately, Japan had that other revenge trip plan in mind. But first, let's check up on another former Globetrotter. Asian Flash would make another trip in 2013, this time to Hong Kong for the Queen Elizabeth II Cup. Despite his win at the Autumn Tonneau Show, Asian Flash hasn't exactly been performing well since his trip to Dubai. He did show a fearsome approach toward the end of the race, but unfortunately, he would only get 3rd. This will be the end of Asian Flash's excursions, although he did return to Japan and win his next race in the Mainichi Okan. Back to France now. The 2013 Prix de l'Arc was supposed to have an absolutely insane cast from Japan to take part. In addition to Orfevre, who has been plotting this whole time, 2012 Double Crown winner Goldship, 2012 Triple Tiara winner Gentildonna, and 2013 Spring Tonneau Show winner Phenomeno were also planned to go with him, but for one reason or another, the latter 3 did not make the expedition, and instead Orfevre would be joined by Japan Derby winner Kazuna. Despite being kicked in the face by another horse he was traveling with, Orfevre once again entered and once again won the Prix Foy by a dominating 3 lengths. Thus, Orfevre once again entered the arc as the favorite. Orfevre started off the same as last year, racing towards the back. And it would be the racers in his position that would make the biggest leap, as Orfevre, Trev, and Kazuna all took off in the final straight. Unfortunately for Orfevre, Kazuna ended up lining up next to him, which somewhat blocked his path. This would ultimately lead to a 4th place finish for Kazuna, another 2nd place finish for Orfevre, and a 1st place finish for Trev. Orfevre would then return to Japan and win his final race, the Arima Keenan, becoming a 6-time G1 winner. Since it's 2014, it's time for another quick conquest of Dubai. This time, Japan would send 3 horses overseas in an attempt to take 3 different races. Let's start with Hoko Taramai. Tomakamai's favorite horse had podium finishes, including 9 graded victories in his last 16 races, so he was sent to participate in the Dubai World Cup. Quite simply though, Hoko Taramai had an impossibly difficult time adapting to the surface of the racecourse and came in 16th place. He would also have to stay in Dubai longer than anticipated after this, after developing stress-induced enterocolitis, but was back racing in Japan in the same year. Elsewhere, the current record holder of the Satsuki show and the very famous Begonia show, Logotype, was sent to participate in the Dubai Duty Free. Admittedly, Logotype had found himself in a bit of a slump at this point, but perhaps his luck would change here. Logotype would be sent with rival Just Away to compete against a tough field comprising of 7 G1 caliber horses. Just Away got off to a late start and hung out in the back with Logotype. Where the former took off in the final straight though, Logotype did not. Unable to keep up, Logotype finished in 6th and watched Just Away set a record time in the Dubai Duty Free. Logotype would return to Japan to try and get out of this slump before making any other big moves. Where her 2 comrades struggled, Gentildonna returned to Dubai in 2014 to once again challenge the Dubai Shima Classic. She stumbled a bit at the previous year's Kyoto Keenan, but otherwise had maintained podium finishes in her other 3 races since her first attempt. Gentildonna started off strong as you might expect, but collided with another racer. Despite this, she kept going at a strong pace and overtook Cirrus de Agla at the final straight, winning the Dubai Shima Classic for the first time by a Japanese horse in almost a decade and in a record time too. A month later, Epiphania would be sent to Hong Kong because Japan really likes participating in the Queen Elizabeth II Cup. The Kikisho winner and perennial podium finisher found himself 2nd favorite. His main competition would be Designs on Rome, and although he did compete well, he ended that race in 3rd place. He did impress his staff, so high aspirations were made for further excursions the following year. Since Orfevre retired, Japan needed a horse who could get down to business and win the Arc this year. This is a different kind of business, they must mean. After missing out on the previous year, Goldship was sent to France to partake in a fashion show or something. I don't remember what she said on the homepage, but somehow ended up in the Arc. At this point, 5 years old, Goldship showed some promise at the 3rd corner with an advance, but it just wouldn't be enough to overcome anybody else, including now 2-time Arc winner Trev. Goldship ended up 8 lengths behind, placing 14th. In 2015, Hoko Taramai once again aimed for the Dubai World Cup. He didn't travel alone though, as he was joined by new Arc hopeful and Japan Cup winner Epiphania. Although Hoko Taramai was an expert on this type of course, this would be Epiphania's first race on dirt, and he didn't react well to it. He struggled mightily and couldn't muster anything up on the rough course, coming in 9th place. Hoko Taramai, on the other hand, got off to a much better start, but started facing traffic issues from other racers as early as the 1st corner. He eventually fell back to 5th place, which is where he ended up finishing. Both would return to Japan, and while training for the Arc a few months later, Epiphania developed ligamentitis and was forced to retire. We have nothing for the rest of 2015, so in 2016, you'll never believe who we're starting with. For the 3rd straight year, and because it's the charm, Hoko Taramai entered the Dubai World Cup and was forced into the back instead of taking up a spot in the upper half. The bad traffic from last time may have gotten to him though, because according to his jockey, he seemed very worried about the other horses around him. This concern threw off his racing game and he ended up placing 9th. The 7-year-old horse would hang up his horseshoes for this year, but over his career was a monster in the Japan dirt scene, so we're okay with this for now. Around the same time, another journey to Dubai started, featuring new Arc aspirant Duramente. The Double Crown horse was coming off an injury, but had placed 1st in record time at the previous year's Japan Derby and has never finished below 2nd place in 7 races. Entering the Dubai Shima Classic as 3rd favorite, there was a small incident before the race where his horseshoe fell off. They refit it, but apparently it wasn't refit very well, and this was pointed to as the reason that Duramente placed all the way back in 2nd. Although he had eyes on the Arc, following the Takarazuka Keenan, Duramente developed severe injuries in both front legs and subsequently retired. Elsewhere, Satono Crown would start a sojourner of his own to Hong Kong. It started with entry into the Queen Elizabeth II Cup, where he started off well, but once pressure started to be applied further in the race, he was lackadaisical, which saw him fall all the way down to 12th. After an unsuccessful return to Japan, Crown was sent back to Hong Kong later in the year to participate in the Hong Kong Vase. In the Vase race, he would not only face the horse who had defeated him in the QE2C, but the runner-up in that year's Arc, Highland Reel. Highland Reel was the overwhelming favorite compared to Satono Crown, but this time, it would be those 2 horses engaged in a battle for the lead on the final straight. Crown ended up just barely winning this race over Highland Reel, becoming the 2nd Satono horse to win a G1. Don't worry, more on the first later. On the same day, the Hong Kong Mile would see a competitor who had gone on excursion before, but not since 2014. Logotype had won that year's Yasuda Keenan, but that was his only victory since the 2013 Satsuki show. Nevertheless, he got off to a good start, closely tracking the leaders of the race, but couldn't get any momentum going and ended up coming in a relatively close 5th. On to the next year, and who else could we start with other than Sounds of Earth? Sounds of Earth had been racing since 2013 among greats like Kitasan Black and Goldship, but didn't exactly have the gold to go with his long tenure, only having won 2 out of 20 races, with neither victory coming in graded races. Not to be completely unfair to him, he did have 8 second place finishes in G2 and G1 races. Thus, Sounds of Earth was sent to Dubai to take part in the Dubai Shima Classic. He started off as he normally would in the middle of the pack, but got stuck on the inside with no way out. Because of that pace, he was trapped and ended up in 6th place. To his credit though, he stuck it out racing until 2018, retiring at 7 years old. Earth wasn't the only one sent to Dubai though, as 2017 would be the prequel to another prominent excursion racehorse. Vivlos to this point had what one could call a mixed record of race results, but was coming off a victory at the Shuka show. She was sent abroad to race in the Dubai Turf, formerly known as the Dubai Duty Free. During the race, Vivlos stayed around the middle of the field until the last straight, where she took off from the inside and cut off the paths of her competition, winning the Dubai Turf and becoming the 5th Japanese filly to win an overseas race. Vivlos returned to Japan to mixed success, but just you wait till we're out of this year. Since Satono Crown had won an international G1 the previous year, Satono Diamond was sent to France in an attempt to do the same. The first horse with the name Satono to win a G1 after winning the previous year's Kikisho and Arena Keenan, his attention was on the Arc in early 2017. The plan was the exact same as the plan when Orfevre went. Win the Prix Foy and then the Arc. Entering the former as the favorite, Satono Diamond would have to face bad conditions due to weather. Not only that, but he hadn't run in a race for almost half a year in preparation for the Prix Foy. This combination turned out to be a problem for Satono Diamond as he fell to 4th place to finish. This also affected his odds in the Arc as he plummeted to 20/1 odds. Not only were the track conditions still bad, but it was speculated that something was off physically with the horse, be it illness or otherwise. Satono Diamond went through with the race anyway, but finished in 15th after being overall uncompetitive and returned to Japan. Kiseki also started an excursion journey this year. With France and Dubai covered, Kiseki was sent to Hong Kong to once again try and claim the vase. Fresh off a Kikisho victory, Kiseki made the trek over, but once he got there, his staff found that he had some sort of infection on his left front leg, but it was deemed to be mild, so he ran in the vase anyway. He got off to a surprisingly typical late start in the vase that he couldn't recover from, so he ended up taking 9th. He returned to Japan to plot further good plans for excursions later. 2018 saw international returns from both Vivlos and Satono Crown. Both of them were sent to Dubai in March to participate in the Dubai Turf and Dubai Shima Classic, respectively. Let's start with Vivlos. She was registered with 4 other Japanese horses, so Japan made up half the participants in this running of the Dubai Turf. Vivlos started off waiting in the back and took off in the last straight alongside Real Steel. Although she would win the battle against Real Steel, she couldn't overtake eventual winner Ben Battle and ended up coming in 2nd, which is still nothing to sneeze at. Satono Crown would return to Dubai for the first time in 2 years to attempt to take the Dubai Shima Classic trophy. He got off to a poor start and got bumped around by other horses throughout the race, so he never really could get going. Unfortunately, this would continue a pretty bad slump for Crown as he placed in 7th after a painfully slow pace that never really afforded him an opportunity to break out. Satono Crown's excursion ends here, but Vivlos still had business to attend to. Vivlos returned to Japan after the Dubai Turf, but then traveled to Hong Kong for the Hong Kong Mile. This was announced to be Vivlos' retirement race, and it wouldn't be easy as she would have to go against local horse and overwhelming favorite, Beauty Generation. Despite the odds being against her, Vivlos found herself locked in battle with the favorite. Where Beauty Generation led for most of the contest, Vivlos was close behind. She ended up unable to close the gap at the end, placing 2nd by under a length. As a result of this impressive showing though, Vivlos' retirement would be delayed, and thus we find ourselves in 2019 following Vivlos once again to Dubai. This time, because Japan was serious about winning for real, they sent their best expedition racer Vivlos alongside frequent excursioner Deidre and... uh-oh. Because Almond Eye had presumably nothing better to do with her time, coming off a year in which she was undefeated in 5 races, won the Triple Tiara, and set records in both the Oka Show and Japan Cup, she was sent to Dubai with eyes on that year's Arc. Both Japanese representatives met on the final straight. This really was a battle between 2 forces in their own right, and it once again ended up with Vivlos chasing first place Almond Eye, both of whom had made their moves launching from the middle of the pack. Unfortunately for Vivlos, met with hitherto unforeseen strength, she couldn't catch up but placed 2nd behind Almond Eye, who added to her own incredible legacy. This would be the race that Vivlos ended her career on, but she would interestingly retire with significantly more monetary success overseas than in her native Japan. Luckily for Vivlos, she had great company that year as half-brother Cheval Grand was also sent to Dubai as part of a longer expedition. By this point, Cheval Grand had been racing for 5 years to mixed success with his most recent victory in the 2017 Japan Cup. Nevertheless, he was entered into the Dubai Shima Classic. Despite what his record at the time may indicate, he had a very strong race here and made a good effort in the last stretch, but ended up falling to 2nd place, meaning both Cheval Grand and Vivlos placed 2nd in their respective races on the same day. Aww. Cheval Grand then traveled to Europe to race in Great Britain. He was first entered in the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Stakes, a race that a Japanese horse has still not yet won. Cheval entered against fierce competition, including 8-time G1 winner Enable and graded race regular Crystal Ocean. The track conditions were poor, which also didn't work in Cheville's favor, and against the top racers in Europe, he ended up in 6th. Cheville Grand next had sights on the British International Stakes, which you may remember from 12 years ago when I talked about with Zeno Robroy, who was the last Japanese racehorse to race there, so I guess Japan is just letting Britain know that they haven't forgotten that they have business here. In this race, Cheville Grand started off strong, but at the final stretch, he couldn't react to the other competitors' final spurts and ended up all the way down in 8th, losing to Japan. The horse. Its name is Japan. I don't think this counts for the country. Ah man, it's already July. I guess we have just enough time to take a quick detour to France again. Like I said, Almond Eye had eyes on the Arc this year, but when she came back from Dubai, she was found to be dehydrated and fatigued, so her staff decided to prioritize her health and stayed in Japan for the rest of the year. Instead, Japan would send Kiseki and Blast One Piece to the land of the baguette. Kiseki was sporting 5 new podium finishes since we last saw him and entered the Prix Foy. He was racing fine throughout, but his final spurt was lacking, so he fell to 3rd out of 4. Let's move on to the Arc. Kiseki and Blast One Piece both entered this race heavily unfavored. That was probably due to the fact that Enable, remember her, was now on a 12-race winning streak. Kiseki hung out towards the back and got stuck there to start the race. Not to be outdone, 2018's Arima Keenan winner Blast One Piece was even further back thanks to the track conditions. Wait, that's not a good thing. Neither horse could really get out of their pack, with Kiseki finishing in 7th and Blast One Piece finishing in 11th. Blast in particular raced his poor little heart out, barely being able to stand up after the race. Also, in case you were curious, Enable didn't win this race. It was instead won by Waldegeist. Once more later in the year, a lucky horse would be sent to partake in the Hong Kong Vase. The luckiest horse, in fact, Lucky Lilac, was sent over after a victory in the Japanese Queen Elizabeth II Cup. In yet another bid in the game of anything you can do, I can do too with her rival Almond Eye, she entered with Deidre, who had spent almost her entire year abroad, and Glory Vase. In the Hong Kong Vase. It's hilarious. Lucky Lilac would actually end up battling Glory Vase for the lead with Deidre not far behind. But Glory Vase would be the one just barely to pull ahead in the last second, winning by just over half a length over Lucky Lilac. For some odd, inexplicable reason, no umamusume characters went on excursion for 2020, although there were still excursions made. So we're jumping over to our last year with a big batch of examples, 2021. First things first, we start over in Dubai, where 2 new horses would take on the Dubai Shima Classic. Japanese Oaks winner and record holder Loves Only You, alongside Arima Keenan winner Chronogenesis. The former had intended to go last year, but couldn't for some reason that I'm not saying, and the latter was slated to be the next Japanese representative in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. Even though Loves Only You had a terrible year last year, she entered as 3rd favorite while Chronogenesis entered as 1st. During the race, Loves Only You stayed behind, marking Chronogenesis and eventually overtaking her. The pair of them would race against each other fiercely during the final straight, but at the very last moment, 2nd favorite Mishrif would overtake Chronogenesis and barely eke out the victory, leaving Chrono in 2nd and Love in 3rd. While Chronogenesis returned to Japan in preparation for her trip to France, Loves Only You would continue her expedition to Hong Kong. This time she'd be joined by familiar faces Glory Vase and Kiseki, as well as 2020 Triple Tiara winner Daring Tact. All 4 racers would participate in the Queen Elizabeth II Cup. All of them grouped up in the middle of the pack to begin the race, and at the final spurt, all 4 of them took off, overtaking the then leader Time Warp. Loves Only You and Daring Tact took to the front to duel it out, with Glory Vase and Kiseki making late moves, but it would be Loves Only You coming just ahead of Glory Vase. Japan ended up taking all 4 top positions in this race, and this time, all 4 returned to Japan, but we'll be hearing from one of them again before the year is out. While that was going down, Chronogenesis became the 3rd horse and 1st mare in history to win 3 consecutive Grand Prix races and entered the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe highly favored. She started off in fantastic form by chasing in 3rd place. Unfortunately, she couldn't maintain this pace and eventually ran out of stamina, dropping back and eventually finishing in 7th. She then returned to finish her career in that year's Arima Keenan. So of the 4 horses I mentioned earlier, which one do you think kept it going? Okay, well, technically it was 2 of them, but let's talk about the one with the funny hat. Coming off a 2nd place finish in the Sapporo Keenan, Loves Only You took to America. Here she would participate in the G1 Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. There would be tough competition here, as she was going up against Warlike Goddess, who was on a 4-race winning streak, and Double Crown horse from England, Love. That's gonna be confusing. While Loves Only You started in her typical spot in the middle, both those other horses made their moves to the front from way outside. However, that seemed to have expended more energy than they wanted, as My Sister Nat would slowly overtake them, followed by Loves Only You. Between the 2 of them, Loves Only You managed to take the lead by half a length and became the first Japanese horse to win a G1 race in Japan, Hong Kong, and the United States. Speaking of Hong Kong, that was where Loves Only You was headed next, but another horse would participate in a race the same day, Marche Lorraine. The prominent Japanese dirt racer found herself in the G1 Breeders' Cup Distaff. Marche Lorraine had participated in G1 equivalent dirt races, but has yet to find success, so she entered as 9th favorite overall. She started at the back, but at the last corner surprised everyone by making up significant ground and taking the lead, competing with Dunbar Road. Marche Lorraine was able to hold the lead through the end of the race and become not only the first Japanese, but also the first non-North American horse to win the race. Back to Loves Only You. The Hong Kong Cup was announced to be her final race. This time, entering as #1 favorite, her typical strategy saw her caught up in a struggle with fellow Japanese horse Hishi Iguazu. The seasoned veteran at this point made her way past Hishi Iguazu and leader Russian Emperor to take yet another foreign victory in the Cup. Because of her overseas victory, Loves Only You also joins Vivlos as another horse with more career earnings in foreign races than local ones. After her success in America, Marche Lorraine then made the trek to compete in the 2022 Saudi Cup as a retirement race. Entering her 6-year-old season, she was unable to keep up with the pace of her competition in the final straight, falling back to a pack left behind and couldn't get past 6th place despite a good start and good positioning throughout. It took another 2 years to get another umamusume rep sometime overseas, but the entire rest of this video is going to be spent covering Forever Young. Coming into 2024, Forever Young, who's owned by some guy who owns some company, which has a company which makes some game, had won all 3 races he partook in, including the JBC 2-year-old Yushun and Zen Nippon 2-year-old Yushun, the latter of which being a Grade 1 equivalent dirt race. The real steel progeny would first enter the Saudi Derby. The Derby would be a struggle for Forever Young at the beginning as he got off to a late start and was forced to run outside until he reached the middle pack. Once he got there, he was able to race more comfortably, but he was far behind the leader thanks to his rough start, being around 4 or 5 lengths back. Incredibly though, with scant time remaining, Forever Young was able to pick up the pace and pass his opposition by a nose, and in doing so, set a record in the Saudi Derby by almost 2 seconds. Forever Young would have his attention turned to the Kentucky Derby, a race that has seen Japanese participation, but as of yet, not so much as a podium finish. To earn Kentucky Derby points, which are earned in Kentucky Derby prep races, sort of like qualifying races for the Triple Crown, Forever Young would enter the UAE Derby held in Dubai. This time he would have a much better start and found himself in a good position behind the leaders in the race. Thanks to this position, later in the race he was able to overtake his competition and win by 2 whole lengths. Forever Young then headed to America as an undefeated racer, entering the Kentucky Derby as 3rd favorite. Once again though, he got off to a late start and was in the middle of the pack. Just before the 3rd corner, he made his move to advance on the leaders and found himself competing with Mystic Dan and Sierra Leone. All 3 of these horses crossed the finish line together and the result went to a photo finish. The evidence found that Forever Young finished in 3rd by a nose and a head to Mystic Dan, handing Forever Young his first career loss. After a brief trip home to win the Japan Dirt Classic, Forever Young entered the Breeders' Cup Classic in America. Once again, he would find himself racing against Sierra Leone. It would be Sierra Leone who gave him the most trouble in this race as an imposing wall he couldn't break through, as Forever Young couldn't catch him from his far back position and took 3rd. His trainer was quick to point out that this might have been thanks to Forever Young starting at the innermost post. After another brief trip home to win the Tokyo Daishoten, Forever Young was invited to the Saudi Cup and Dubai World Cup in 2025. In the Saudi Cup, Forever Young found himself in the 3rd and 2nd place positions to start off, and eventually found himself competing against Romantic Warrior, a horse who had dominated the Hong Kong racing scene who had 10 G1 wins to this point. Romantic Warrior took the lead from Forever Young briefly in the final stretch, but Forever Young wouldn't fall too far behind and managed to outstretch his opposition by a neck to claim victory in the Saudi Cup in record time. As a result of this win, Forever Young was slowly becoming one of the highest earning racehorses of all time, now in 3rd place. It was also declared that later in the year, Forever Young would return to America to take on the Breeders' Cup again. For now though, he moved to take on the Dubai World Cup and entered as the overwhelming favorite to win. Despite seeming irritated after some pre-race procedures took too long, Forever Young found himself pace chasing again toward the lead. This time, in the final stretch, he couldn't keep up with the horses in front and finished in 3rd by 2 lengths to underdog Hit Show. After yet another brief trip home to win the Nippon TV High, is anybody else getting deja vu? Forever Young traveled back to California for his revenge race in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Forever Young's American rival and the previous year's Breeders' Cup winner, Sierra Leone, was also to be in this race, and after being toward the lead for most of the race, found that same horse on his trail. Forever Young took the lead but was dealing with dogged pursuit from Sierra Leone, but Sierra Leone was never able to pass him, and Forever Young won his first American race. At this point in time, Forever Young was the highest earning Japanese racehorse of all time and was the first dirt running horse to win the JRA Horse of the Year award. And this takes us to 2026. Once again with eyes on the Saudi Cup and Dubai World Cup, Forever Young entered the former once again in February. Much like last year, he found himself toward the front, joined by Nisos, the winner of the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Nisos, who was his closest competition, couldn't close the distance, and Forever Young won his 2nd Saudi Cup. And then, as of literally a week ago, because they knew I was making this video and had to make the process just a little bit longer on me, Forever Young took part in the Dubai World Cup. He found himself racing in 2nd pretty much throughout the entire race, behind Magnitude the whole time. During the majority of the race, he was fairly close to Magnitude, but come the final stretch, Magnitude was able to separate himself more and more from the pack, and though he tried to catch up, Forever Young couldn't close the distance and took his first ever 2nd place finish. And until Cygames adds Equinox to the game, that's the complete list of excursions that umamusume characters have taken. If you made it this far, then I grant you the secret knowledge to get UA ranks in Breeders' Cup. Don't say I never used my power for good.